I don't normally do singular book reviews on this channel. I don't think anyone on BookTube, unless you're talking serious literature, does just normal book reviews. I wanted to talk about this book for a long time, and I kind of covered it in a wrap-up, but it's been bugging me since. Children of Blood and Bone. I think a lot of people are scared to criticise this book, just going by the nature of it. But I'm just going to lay what I think. So the writer had some drama on Twitter after accusing a very established writer of stealing her title and banking on her success. Writers don't own their titles. There is no such thing, unless it's like Harry Potter or something. You really don't own that title. For the simple reason, how many books with Children of Blood and Bone, or Blood and Bone, or any variation on that theme, it's like a big pool. So after all that, I decided to get the book out of my library and read it. So I wrote this review when I read it, and I've done a new version of that same review, and I'm just gonna roll with it and see what happens. So first things first, what did I think of the story? I didn't rate the story. It reminded me too much. It reminded me so much of Avatar: The Last Airbender. The story beats, the characters also reminded me of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Frustrated me no end. It was almost because she cited in interviews that it had been an influence that it was inspired by, but to me it literally read like someone wrote Avatar: The Last Airbender fanfiction and then just changed the names. But I mean, even the story beats. It also bugged me that when I read the book, it didn't feel like a novel. It felt like a YA franchise in the waiting. It felt like this book had been written with the intention of it being a film. In parts, it felt kind of like a screenplay, and I really don't understand the hype around it. The writing for me was weak, the character development was weak, and it had this, like I said, a very fanficky feel. And there is nothing worse than a book that feels like fanfiction, with the names changed. I mean, the characters, the character relationships, even the villains felt very much like Avatar: The Last Airbender. I've read some fantastic fantasy based on African myth and legend, one of those books being the Keshi. I still cannot pronounce this right, and everyone I see pronounces it different, so this is a fantastic novel. If you want African fantasy with a strong backbone, this is it. This is gorgeous. This is a beautiful piece of writing. Children of Blood and Bone was not good. I actually enjoyed reading the book, but in my head I kept saying characters' names. It was too close to its inspiration. It didn't feel like an original piece of work. I also didn't like her writing style. Again, it felt like she was coming from this very filmic point of view, and very obviously this book had been written with the idea of turning it into a film or a franchise. It's very much, this book is written as the first part of a series. It was very obviously, there is a lot of sequel bait. It doesn't stand on its own two legs. What frustrated me even more was just the overall clogginess of it. It was messy. It wasn't particularly well written. It was predictable. It was tropey. Every YA fantasy trope is here. 99% of YA fantasy is about romance rather than fantasy, although justify this. I mean, it's an oversimplified, extra tropey YA novel on steroids. I did love the setting. I will say that. I thought the setting was gorgeous, but everything else was driving me up the wall. I mean, it was repetitive, the immature characters, incredibly inconsistent pacing. It felt like this book needed a better editor. I mean, it was, what, 500 pages? And by the end of it, I was done. The characters were the biggest downfall of this novel. If you cannot write good characters in a fantasy, you are pretty much dead. I hated the romance. Again, like I said, most YA novels are about romance and not the fantasy is not about the fantasy, it's about the romance and the love story and the whole me and you against the world trope. It was incredibly unnecessary and actually kind of made me cringe. It really, really made me cringe. I know BookTube screamed about this book for ages and big booktubers were singing its praise, but this book drove me absolutely nuts. If you're gonna write a fantasy novel, it doesn't matter your demographic, write a fucking fantasy novel. Don't write Avatar: The Last Airbender fanfiction with an unnecessary romance and horrible characters. Write something with guts. Write something with power. Write something like this. Write something that doesn't pander to your audience. This book was just hollow. It was hollow, it was messy, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, and I'm glad that I didn't buy it and I got it from my library. It was dire, and it was too tropey, it was too cliched, it was too predictable, and I just got to the end of it and hated every page. I was expecting something amazing, something powerful, something that matched these reviews that everyone was giving it, and it didn't. It rode the hype train. The irony is, I think it will work better as a film. I think it's probably got more going for it in the sense of turning it into a film than an actual book. Because at least as a film, you can trim some of this and actually make it more practical. That is my rant review of Children of Blood and Bone. And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but this book has been bugging me for God knows how long, so here I am.